Put on a uniform, any uniform. A name tag, a lanyard, a referee's whistle. Within minutes, something in you shifts. You stand differently. You speak differently. You start making decisions a version of you from an hour ago wouldn't have made. Most people assume this is just professionalism, a little performance for the job. But the real answer is far stranger. The uniform isn't covering you. It's replacing parts of you. And the most famous proof of this came from a basement in California in 1971, where a psychologist accidentally discovered how thin the line really is between who you are and who you're told to be. His name was Philip Zimbardo. He was a professor at Stanford University, and he had a simple question. Put ordinary people into a fake prison, assign half of them as guards, assign half as prisoners, then watch what happens. No one was chosen for cruelty. No one was chosen for weakness. Every single participant was a healthy, average young man, screened for stability, paid $2 a day. The only variable Zimbardo changed was the role. Within 6 days, the experiment had to be shut down. Guards who had never harmed anyone in their lives began inventing punishments. Push-ups, sleep deprivation, humiliation games that escalated by the hour. Prisoners who knew, logically, that this was fake, that they could walk out, that the bars were cardboard and the whole thing was an act, began having breakdowns anyway. One man sobbed uncontrollably on the second day. Another developed a psychosomatic rash across his whole body. The prison was never real. The collapse was. What stopped it wasn't a researcher noticing the data was complete. It was a person. Her name was Christina Maslach, a young psychologist visiting the basement to interview the guards. She watched men she would later describe as boys marching hooded, shackled prisoners to the bathroom, screaming numbers instead of names. She turned to Zimbardo, furious, and said something close to, "What are you doing to these boys?" He didn't see it as cruelty in that moment. He saw it as data. That single sentence from her broke the spell he was under too, and the experiment ended 6 days into a planned 2 weeks. Here's the part that should bother you. Zimbardo didn't lose his mind. Maslach wasn't a hero swooping in from outside the system. She was simply the only person in that basement who hadn't yet been assigned a role inside it. So what actually happened to everyone else? This wasn't the first time psychology had stumbled onto this idea. 10 years earlier, a researcher named Stanley Milgram ran a study at Yale where ordinary volunteers were told to administer what they believed were increasingly painful electric shocks to a stranger, simply because a man in a lab coat told them to continue. Most of them did. Not because they were sadistic, because the situation gave them a role, and the role came with its own logic, its own permission, its own version of what was reasonable. Zimbardo's prison did the same thing, just faster and with less subtlety. Give a person a badge and tell them they are in charge of order, and a strange transformation begins. Not because the badge changes their values, because the badge changes which version of themselves feels appropriate to use. Think about how strange that actually is. You don't become a different person. You already contain that person. The role just decides which one gets to drive. For decades, this story was taught almost like a fable. Ordinary people, dropped into evil circumstances, will become capable of evil. Situations are more powerful than character. It became one of the most cited studies in psychology, retold in textbooks, films, and 1,000 classroom lectures about human nature. But here's the twist, almost nobody includes when they tell this story. In 2018, a French researcher named Thibault Letexier got access to the original audio archives from the experiment, recordings Zimbardo had kept for decades. What he found complicated the legend. Zimbardo hadn't simply set up a prison and watched. He had coached the guards. He'd held a briefing the night before, telling them to be tough, to create a sense of powerlessness, even suggesting tactics. Some guards later admitted they were performing what they thought the researchers wanted to see. So was it fake? Not exactly. The breakdowns were real. The cruelty was real. The rash, the sobbing, the early shutdown, all of it happened. What changes is the explanation. It wasn't proof that situations spontaneously summon monsters out of nowhere. It was proof of something almost more unsettling. People don't even need a fully organic transformation to abandon themselves. A little structure, a little expectation, a little social pressure to perform the role correctly, and most people will comply without ever consciously deciding to become someone else. You don't need a villain. You just need a job description. This is where it stops being a story about a basement in 1971 and starts being a story about you. Every time you've put on a uniform for work, you felt some version of this. The calm, professional version of you that emerges behind a counter, a desk, a badge. The way your tone shifts on a customer service call versus a text to a friend. The way an anonymous online username can make you say things the named version of you never would. None of that requires evil. It only requires a role with its own built-in expectations, repeated often enough that you stop noticing you're performing it at all. Researchers have a name for the layer underneath this. Deindividuation, the psychological process where personal identity fades and group or role identity takes over. It happens in mobs. It happens in military units. It also happens quietly, every single day, in offices and group chats and customer service scripts, anywhere a role is handed to you before you've had a chance to decide who you want to be in that moment. Here's the question worth sitting with. If a cardboard prison and $2 a day was enough to make ordinary Stanford students start sounding like wardens within 6 days, how much is your job title doing to you right now, today, without you ever clocking it? You probably think you'd notice. Most people in that basement thought the same thing. Christina Maslach noticed because she hadn't been given a role yet. Everyone else was already wearing one. So go back to that uniform. The name tag, the lanyard, the whistle, it still feels like something you put on. But maybe it's closer to something that quietly puts you on, one shift at a time, until you forget there was ever a version of you standing there without it.